The sun had barely risen over Kensington Palace when Princess Kate opened her eyes. Today was not just any ordinary day. It was the day that would be remembered in history books for generations to come. The coronation of King Charles III was finally here, and the entire royal family would be under the watchful eyes of millions around the world. Kate stretched gently in her bed, careful not to wake Prince William, who was still sleeping peacefully beside her. She could hear the soft sounds of activity beginning throughout the palace, as staff members prepared for what would be one of the most important days in recent royal history. The weight of the occasion settled on her shoulders like a familiar but heavy cloak. Moving quietly to the window, Kate pulled back the curtains and gazed out at the gardens below. The weather looked promising, with clear skies and gentle morning light filtering through the trees. She whispered a small prayer of gratitude. Rain would have complicated everything, from the procession to the thousands of people already gathering along the streets of London. William stirred behind her, sensing her absence from the bed. "Good morning, my love," he said softly, his voice still thick with sleep. "Are you ready for today?" Kate turned to face her husband, the future King of England, and smiled. "As ready as one can be for something like this," she replied, moving back to sit on the edge of the bed. "The children will need extra attention today. George understands the importance, but Charlotte and Louis might get overwhelmed." William sat up and reached for her hand. They had discussed this day countless times over the past months. Every detail had been planned and rehearsed, from the timing of their arrival at Westminster Abbey to the precise order they would walk down the aisle. But no amount of preparation could truly ready them for the emotions and significance of witnessing his father become king. Down the hall, 9-year-old Prince George was already awake, staring at the ceiling of his bedroom. He had been thinking about today for weeks. His grandfather was going to be crowned king, which meant his father would move one step closer to the throne, and eventually, the crown would be his. The thought both excited and frightened him. George understood more than his younger siblings about what this day meant for their family's future. Princess Charlotte, now 8 years old, was still fast asleep. Her dark hair spread across her pillow like a fan. She had been so excited the night before that it had taken extra bedtime stories to calm her down. Charlotte loved the pageantry and ceremony of royal events. She had already picked out her favorite dress and practiced her curtsy dozens of times in front of her bedroom mirror. 5-year-old Prince Louis was curled up with his favorite stuffed animal, completely unaware that this morning would be different from any other. At his age, the concept of a coronation was still too abstract to fully grasp. But he knew something special was happening because everyone around him had been acting differently for days. Kate made her way to the nursery wing of the palace, where their nanny was already preparing breakfast for the children. "Good morning, Maria," Kate said warmly to the woman who had helped care for her children for years. "I thought I'd help get them ready today." "Of course, Your Royal Highness," Maria replied with a knowing smile. She understood that on days like this, Kate preferred to be hands-on with her children's care. It was one of the things that made Kate such a beloved mother and public figure, her genuine desire to be present for her children during important moments. Back in their bedroom, William was reviewing the schedule one final time with his private secretary. The timing had to be perfect. They would leave Kensington Palace at exactly 10:30 in the morning, arrive at Westminster Abbey by 11:15, and take their seats in the front row before the ceremony began at noon. Every minute was accounted for. Every possible delay had been considered and planned for. "The children's schedule is slightly different," his secretary noted. "Prince George will walk in the procession with you and the princess, but Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis will enter separately with their cousins to avoid any potential disruptions during the more solemn parts of the ceremony." William nodded. They had made this decision weeks ago, knowing that Louis in particular might struggle with the length and formality of the coronation service. It was better to have a backup plan than to risk any embarrassing moments during such a historic event. As the morning progressed, the palace began to hum with increased activity. Florists arrived with fresh arrangements, security personnel conducted final sweeps of the grounds, and the royal protection officers gathered for their last briefing. Outside the palace gates, photographers and news crews were already setting up their equipment, hoping to catch the first glimpse of the family as they departed. Kate spent extra time in the children's rooms, helping them get dressed and explaining once again what would happen during the day. George listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about the ceremony and his role in it. Charlotte practiced her wave in the mirror, giggling as she tried different hand positions. Louis was more interested in the breakfast selection, completely focused on choosing between jam and honey for his toast. "Remember," Kate told them as she adjusted George's tie, "today is very special for Grandpa. He's going to become king, which is a very important job. We need to be on our best behavior and show everyone how proud we are of him." George nodded seriously. "Will there be lots of people watching us, Mama?" "Yes, darling, there will be many people there and many more watching on television around the world," Kate explained gently. "But you just need to focus on walking nicely and sitting quietly. You've practiced this before." Charlotte bounced on her toes with excitement. "Will I get to wear my special dress?" "The blue one with the flowers?" "Yes, you'll wear your special dress," Kate confirmed, smoothing down Charlotte's hair. "And Louis will wear his smart little suit." William joined them, looking distinguished in his ceremonial uniform. The dark blue fabric with gold braiding caught the morning light streaming through the windows. He had worn this uniform before, but today it felt heavier somehow, weighted with the significance of the occasion. "Are we ready?" he asked, though he could see from their faces that they were as ready as they would ever be. The next few hours would test their composure, their training, and their ability to represent the monarchy with the dignity and grace that the British people expected from their royal family. The black Bentley waited in the palace courtyard, its surface polished to a mirror shine that reflected the morning sun. Prince William adjusted his ceremonial sword one final time, before stepping out to join his family. The driver, who had served the royal family for over 20 years, stood at attention beside the vehicle, his white gloves pristine and his uniform immaculate. Kate emerged from the palace entrance, and for a moment William forgot to breathe. She wore a flowing cream-colored dress with intricate embroidery that caught the light with every step. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, crowned with a delicate tiara that had belonged to his grandmother. She moved with the grace and confidence that had made her one of the most admired women in the world. "You look absolutely beautiful," William whispered as he offered her his arm. Kate smiled, a genuine expression of joy and nervousness mixed together. She had chosen her outfit carefully, wanting to honor the solemnity of the occasion while still reflecting her own personal style. Prince George walked beside his parents, his small chest puffed out with pride as he wore his first formal court dress. The young prince had been practicing his posture for weeks, and today he looked every inch the future king. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his serious expression showed that he understood the importance of the day. Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis would travel in a separate car with their aunt and uncle, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. This arrangement would allow the children to be more relaxed during the journey, while still ensuring they arrived at Westminster Abbey in time for their entrance. As their car pulled away from Kensington Palace, crowds of people were already lining the streets. Word had spread quickly through social media that the royal family was beginning their journey, and hundreds of well-wishers had gathered along the route. Many held small British flags, while others had brought flowers and homemade signs expressing their support for the monarchy. "Look at all those people," George observed, peering out the window with wide eyes. "Are they all here to see Grandpa become king?" "They're here to celebrate with our whole family," Kate explained gently. "This is a very special day for everyone in the country, not just for us." William watched his son's face as they drove through the streets of London. The boy was taking everything in, from the police officers lining the route to the television cameras positioned at every corner. It was George's first major royal event where he would play a significant role, and William could see both excitement and nervousness in his expression. The journey to Westminster Abbey normally took about 20 minutes, but today they were traveling slowly to allow people along the road to see them clearly. Every few blocks, Kate would wave gracefully to the crowds, her smile never faltering despite the pressure she must have been feeling. William admired her composure. She had mastered the art of appearing relaxed and happy, even when she knew millions of people were scrutinizing her every gesture. "Papa, will I have to do this when I'm older?" George asked quietly, still watching the crowds through the window. William considered his answer carefully. He wanted to be honest with his son about the responsibilities that lay ahead, but he also didn't want to overwhelm him. "Someday, yes," he said finally. "But you'll have lots of time to learn and practice just like Mama and I did." Kate reached over and squeezed George's hand reassuringly. "And we'll always be there to help you," she added. "Being part of this family means we support each other." As they approached the heart of London, the crowds grew thicker and more enthusiastic. People were pressed against the barriers, trying to get the best possible view of the royal car. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving frantically whenever they caught sight of the familiar faces inside the vehicle. The police motorcade ahead of them moved with precision, clearing the way while allowing enough time for the public to see the royal family. William could see photographers running alongside the car at certain points, their cameras clicking constantly as they tried to capture the perfect shot of this historic journey. "There's Westminster Abbey," Kate pointed out as the ancient building came into view. The Gothic towers rose majestically against the blue sky, and even from a distance they could see the crowds gathered around the entrance. Television crews from around the world had set up their equipment, creating a forest of satellite dishes and cameras. George's eyes widened as he took in the scene ahead of them. The abbey was surrounded by what looked like thousands of people, all dressed in their finest clothes and waiting patiently for the ceremony to begin. Military bands were positioned at strategic points, their instruments glinting in the sunlight. "It's bigger than I remembered," George said softly, and William couldn't help but smile. His son had been to the abbey before for family services, but never for an event of this magnitude. The car slowed as they approached the final stretch before the abbey. Kate took a deep breath and checked her reflection one last time in her compact mirror. Everything had to be perfect from this moment forward. Every step, every gesture, every expression would be captured and analyzed by historians, journalists, and royal watchers around the globe. William reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. They had been through many public events together over the years, but this felt different. This was the moment when his father would officially become king, making William next in line to inherit the throne. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier today than ever before. "We can do this," he whispered to Kate, who nodded and straightened her shoulders with renewed confidence. As their car pulled into the designated area in front of Westminster Abbey, the noise from the crowd became more intense. People were cheering and calling out their names, creating a wall of sound that was both exhilarating and overwhelming. The door of the car opened, and William stepped out first, turning immediately to offer his hand to Kate. The moment her feet touched the red carpet, 1,000 camera flashes went off simultaneously, creating a strobe effect that could be seen even in the bright morning sunshine. George followed his parents out of the car, and the crowd's reaction intensified. Here was the young prince, the future of the monarchy, making one of his first major public appearances. He stood close to his father, clearly drawing strength from William's presence while trying to maintain his own composure. The family stood together for a moment at the entrance to the abbey, allowing the photographers to capture this historic image. 3 generations of the royal family, dressed in their finest ceremonial attire, ready to witness the coronation of King Charles III. The weight of tradition, history, and expectation seemed to settle around them like an invisible cloak. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey seemed to vibrate with anticipation as Prince William, Princess Kate, and Prince George approached the Great West Door. The massive wooden entrance, carved with intricate designs that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies, stood open like a gateway to history itself. Kate felt her heart beating faster as they walked across the red carpet that had been rolled out for the occasion. The fabric beneath her feet was soft and luxurious, but she could feel the weight of every step. Millions of people around the world were watching this moment, and she knew that her composure and grace were not just personal choices, but representations of the monarchy itself. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood at the entrance, his ceremonial robes flowing in the gentle breeze. His face was solemn but kind, and he nodded respectfully as the family approached. "Your Royal Highnesses," he said in his deep, resonant voice, "welcome to this most sacred occasion." William bowed slightly in acknowledgement, his hand resting protectively on George's shoulder. The young prince looked up at the towering abbey walls with a mixture of awe and nervousness. The building seemed impossibly tall from his perspective, its Gothic spires reaching toward the clouds like stone fingers pointing to heaven. Behind them, the second car arrived carrying Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis with their escort. Charlotte practically bounced out of the vehicle, her excitement barely contained despite weeks of coaching about proper royal behavior. Her blue dress fluttered in the morning breeze, and her eyes sparkled with the kind of genuine joy that only children can display. Louis, however, looked slightly overwhelmed by the noise and spectacle surrounding them. At 5 years old, the concept of a coronation was still abstract to him, but he could sense the importance of the moment from the serious expressions of all the adults around him. He reached instinctively for Charlotte's hand, finding comfort in his sister's confident presence. Kate immediately noticed Louis's hesitation and gracefully moved to include both younger children in their group. "Come here, my darlings," she said softly, extending her arms to draw them closer. "Stay close to Mama and Papa." The family formed a perfect picture as they stood together at the Abbey entrance. William in his ceremonial uniform, the gold braiding catching the morning light. Kate in her elegant cream dress, her tiara sparkling like captured starlight. George standing tall and serious beside his father. Charlotte with her bright smile and sparkling eyes. And little Louis, looking up at his mother with complete trust. The bells of Westminster Abbey began to ring, their deep, resonant tones echoing across London and signaling to the nation that the royal family had arrived. The sound was both beautiful and powerful, creating a sonic backdrop that added gravity to every moment. Inside the Abbey, 2,000 guests had already taken their seats. World leaders, members of parliament, representatives from the Commonwealth nations, and dignitaries from around the globe had gathered to witness this historic event. The building hummed with quiet conversation and the rustle of formal attire as people settled into their designated places. As the family moved through the entrance, Kate could see the interior of the Abbey transformed for the coronation. Flowers adorned every pillar, their colors carefully chosen to complement the ancient stone and stained glass. The altar area had been specially prepared with ceremonial items that had been used in royal coronations for centuries. George's eyes widened as he took in the grandeur of the scene before them. The Abbey was filled with more people than he had ever seen in one place, all dressed in their finest clothes and looking toward the altar where his grandfather would soon be crowned king. The weight of tradition and history seemed to press down on him, but he straightened his shoulders and walked forward with determination. Charlotte whispered to her mother in amazement, "Mama, it's like a fairy tale." Her innocent observation brought a genuine smile to Kate's face, helping to ease some of the tension she had been feeling. Children had a way of finding magic in moments that adults might find overwhelming with responsibility. Louis held tightly to Kate's hand as they walked down the aisle. The high ceilings and echoing sounds of the Abbey created an almost otherworldly atmosphere. He could see his grandfather, now King Charles III, already seated near the altar in his ceremonial robes, looking every inch the monarch he was about to officially become. The procession moved slowly, allowing the congregation and the millions watching on television to take in every detail of this historic moment. Kate's training and deportment served her well as she glided down the aisle with perfect posture, her smile warm but appropriately solemn for the occasion. William felt the eyes of the world upon them as they made their way to their designated seats in the front row. He could see members of his extended family already seated, including his aunt Princess Anne, his uncle Prince Edward, and various cousins who had all played roles in preparing for this day. The royal family was united in their support for King Charles III, and their presence demonstrated the strength and continuity of the monarchy. As they reached their seats, Kate helped arrange the children, making sure each one was comfortable and had a clear view of the proceedings. George sat between his parents, while Charlotte and Louis were positioned where Kate could easily attend to them if needed during the long ceremony ahead. The Abbey fell into a respectful silence as the family settled into their places. 2,000 people held their breath, waiting for the ceremony to begin. The only sounds were the gentle whispers of final preparations and the distant noise of crowds still gathering outside. Kate looked around at the faces surrounding them, prime ministers and presidents, religious leaders and community representatives, all gathered to witness the crowning of a new king. She felt a profound sense of privilege to be part of this moment, but also the weight of responsibility that came with their position. William reached over and briefly touched her hand, a small gesture of support and solidarity that spoke volumes about their partnership. Together they would witness his father's coronation, and together they would continue to serve the British people and the Commonwealth with dedication and grace. The moment had arrived. History was about to be made in this ancient abbey, and the royal family was ready to play their part in a ceremony that would be remembered for generations to come. The crown awaited, and with it a new chapter in the long story of the British monarchy. The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived as the choir's voices rose in perfect harmony, filling Westminster Abbey with music that seemed to touch the very stones of the ancient building. The coronation ceremony had officially begun, and Prince William felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he was witnessing history in the making. Kate sat perfectly still, her hands folded gracefully in her lap, but her eyes never left the altar where King Charles III was about to be crowned. She had attended many royal ceremonies over the years, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotional weight of watching her father-in-law become king. The solemnity of the moment was overwhelming, yet beautiful in its ancient traditions. Prince George sat between his parents, his young face serious and focused as he watched the proceedings. He had been coached extensively about what would happen during the ceremony, but seeing it unfold in person was entirely different from any rehearsal or explanation. The pageantry, the music, and the sheer grandeur of the occasion made him feel like he was living inside a history book. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ancient words of the coronation service, his voice carrying clearly throughout the abbey despite its vast size. Every syllable was pronounced with perfect clarity, respecting the weight and significance of words that had been spoken at royal coronations for over 1,000 years. "Sirs, I here present unto you King Charles, your undoubted king," the Archbishop announced, and the congregation responded with a thunderous "God save King Charles." The sound reverberated through the abbey like a wave, and Kate felt tears prick at her eyes despite her efforts to maintain composure. Charlotte and Louis sat quietly beside their mother, both children surprisingly well-behaved given their ages and the length of the ceremony. Charlotte was captivated by the beautiful robes and ceremonial objects, whispering occasionally to ask Kate about what was happening. Louis leaned against his mother's side, comfortable and secure despite the formal atmosphere surrounding them. As the ceremony progressed, various symbolic items were presented to the new king. The orb, representing the Christian world over which the monarch rules, was placed in Charles's left hand. The scepter, symbolizing earthly power, was placed in his right. Each item had been used in royal coronations for centuries, creating an unbroken link between past and present. William watched his father with a mixture of pride and profound emotion. Throughout his life he had known this day would come, but the reality of it was still overwhelming. His father, who had waited longer than any heir in British history to become king, was finally receiving the crown that was his birthright. The most sacred moment of the ceremony approached as the Archbishop lifted St. Edward's crown, the solid gold crown that had been used to crown British monarchs since 1661. The abbey fell into complete silence, with even the youngest children seeming to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Kate held her breath as the crown was slowly lowered onto Charles's head. This was the moment when he would officially transform from Prince of Wales to King of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. The weight of the crown was not just physical but symbolic of the enormous responsibility he was accepting. "God save the King" rang out from every voice in the abbey, and William felt his voice join the chorus along with Kate and the children. The sound was deafening but beautiful, a spontaneous expression of loyalty and celebration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ancient building. George looked up at his father with wide eyes, understanding perhaps for the first time the full magnitude of what lay ahead for their family. His grandfather was now king, his father was now heir to the throne, and someday the crown would pass to him. The young prince seemed to grow a little taller in his seat, as if the weight of future responsibility was already settling on his young shoulders. The congregation began to pay homage to the newly crowned king, with senior royals and government officials approaching the altar to pledge their loyalty. William would soon join this procession, kneeling before his father to swear his allegiance as heir to the throne. The moment represented both a personal and official recognition of the new order of succession. Kate watched her husband prepare for his turn to pay homage, knowing how emotional this moment would be for him. Throughout their marriage, she had seen William grapple with the weight of his future responsibilities, and today marked a significant step closer to the throne. As William rose from his seat and walked toward the altar, the abbey fell silent once again. Every eye was upon him as he approached his father, now King Charles III, to perform the ancient ritual of homage. Kate's heart swelled with pride as she watched her husband move with perfect dignity and grace. William knelt before his father and spoke the traditional words, "I, William, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship, and faith and truth I will bear unto you to live and die, against all manner of folk." The king placed his hands on his son's head in blessing, and for a moment the formal ceremony became deeply personal. This was a father blessing his son, a king acknowledging his heir, and a moment that spoke to both their public duties and private relationship. Kate felt tears threatening to spill over as she watched this exchange between her husband and father-in-law. The beauty and significance of the moment was almost too much to bear. She discreetly dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, grateful for years of training that allowed her to maintain composure even during the most emotional moments. Charlotte tugged gently at her mother's sleeve. "Mama, why is Papa kneeling?" she whispered. "He's promising to help and support Grandpa as king," Kate explained softly, using words that a 7-year-old could understand while still respecting the solemnity of the moment. The ceremony continued with prayers, blessings, and the presentation of various symbols of royal authority. Each element of the service had been carefully preserved and passed down through generations, creating a living link to the long history of the British monarchy. As the formal coronation concluded, the newly crowned King Charles III stood before his subjects wearing the crown that symbolized his divine right to rule. The transformation was complete, and a new chapter in British history had officially begun. The abbey erupted in celebration as the choir sang, "God Save the King," with renewed energy. The congregation rose to their feet, their voices joining in the national anthem with a fervor and emotion that reflected the historic significance of what they had just witnessed. William returned to his seat beside Kate and the children, his eyes bright with unshed tears and his face glowing with pride. He had just pledged his loyalty to his father as king, and the weight of that promise would guide his actions for the rest of his life. As the formal ceremony concluded and the congregation began to move toward the abbey's exit, Princess Kate noticed the subtle changes in her children's behavior. Prince George maintained his composed posture, but she could see the relief in his eyes that the most solemn part of the day was over. Princess Charlotte was practically vibrating with excitement, her eyes bright with joy at having been part of such a magnificent event. Prince Louis, however, had begun to fidget slightly during the last portion of the ceremony. At 5 years old, his attention span had been tested to its limits, and Kate could see that he was ready for a change of scenery. She gently smoothed his hair and whispered words of encouragement, knowing that the day was far from over. "You've all been absolutely wonderful," Kate told her children quietly as they prepared to leave their seats. "Papa and I are so proud of how beautifully you've behaved today." Prince William stood and adjusted his ceremonial sword, his movements careful and deliberate. The weight of what had just occurred was still settling in his mind. His father was now King Charles III, officially and ceremonially, which meant that William's own future responsibilities had shifted significantly. He was no longer just the heir to the throne. He was the heir to a reigning monarch. As they began to move toward the aisle, Kate caught sight of Queen Camilla, now officially the Queen Consort, making her own way through the congregation. The woman who had been by Charles's side throughout his long wait to become king looked radiant in her ceremonial robes, her own crown catching the light from the abbey's windows. The family moved slowly through the crowd of dignitaries and guests, each step carefully measured to maintain the dignity befitting the occasion. George walked beside his father, unconsciously mimicking William's posture and measured pace. The young prince was learning, perhaps without even realizing it, how to carry himself in public during moments of great significance. Charlotte held Kate's hand, her excitement barely contained as she looked around at all the important people surrounding them. She had been told that kings and queens from other countries were present, along with prime ministers and presidents from around the world. For a 7-year-old, it was like being inside a real-life fairy tale. "Mama," Charlotte whispered as they walked, "will I get to wear a crown someday too?" Kate smiled down at her daughter, charmed by the innocent question. "You're already a princess, darling," she replied softly. "That's quite special enough." As they approached the great west door, the sounds from outside grew louder. Thousands of people were still gathered in the streets surrounding Westminster Abbey, all hoping to catch another glimpse of the royal family as they emerged from the historic ceremony. The cheering and celebration could be heard even through the thick stone walls of the ancient building. William felt a flutter of nervousness as they neared the exit. The formal ceremony had been conducted in the relative privacy of the Abbey, with only invited guests present. But stepping outside would mean facing the full attention of the British public and the international media who had been waiting for hours to document this historic day. King Charles III and Queen Camilla had already exited through a different door to begin their own ceremonial procession back to Buckingham Palace. This meant that William, Kate, and the children would be among the most senior royals visible to the crowds outside, carrying the responsibility of representing the newly established reign. Kate took a deep breath as they reached the doorway. Through the opening, she could see the sea of faces, the forest of flags, and the countless cameras all trained in their direction. She had experienced many public appearances over the years, but the intensity of interest surrounding a coronation was unlike anything else. "Remember what we practiced," she said quietly to the children. "Walk slowly, smile naturally, and wave gently to the people who have come to celebrate with us." George nodded seriously, understanding the importance of making a good impression. Charlotte bounced slightly on her toes, eager to see all the people who had gathered. Louis looked up at his mother with complete trust, ready to follow her lead in whatever came next. The moment they stepped into the doorway, a roar of approval rose from the crowd. Thousands of voices called out their names, expressing joy and celebration at seeing the family together on this historic day. The sound was overwhelming but wonderful, a genuine outpouring of affection and support from the British people. William waved to the crowd, his gesture both regal and warm. He had learned over the years how to project confidence and accessibility simultaneously, making the monarchy feel both dignified and approachable. Beside him, Kate's smile was radiant as she acknowledged the enthusiastic welcome. The children responded beautifully to the crowd's energy. George waved with practiced grace, his young face serious but pleased at the positive reception. Charlotte's wave was more animated, her natural exuberance shining through despite all her lessons in royal protocol. Louis looked slightly overwhelmed by the noise but managed a small wave when he saw other children in the crowd waving back at him. Photographers pressed forward, their cameras clicking constantly as they captured every angle of this historic family moment. The images being taken would appear in newspapers and magazines around the world, becoming part of the permanent record of King Charles III's Coronation Day. As they stood together on the Abbey steps, the family created a picture of unity and continuity that spoke to the strength of the monarchy. 3 generations were represented: William as the heir to the throne, Kate as his supportive partner, and their children as the future of the royal family. The crowd's enthusiasm showed no signs of diminishing as people continued to cheer and wave their flags. Many had been waiting for hours in the hope of seeing the royal family, and their patience was being rewarded with this extended opportunity to share in the celebration. Kate noticed an elderly woman in the front row of the crowd, tears streaming down her face as she waved a small Union Jack flag. The sight touched her deeply, reminding her of the genuine emotional connection that many people felt to the royal family and the significance of occasions like this in their lives. William leaned slightly toward his wife and children, creating an intimate family moment even in the midst of such public attention. "Look how happy everyone is," he said softly. "This is what makes all the responsibility worthwhile." The children looked out at the sea of smiling faces with wonder. For them, this level of public attention was still relatively new and exciting. They were beginning to understand their place in the British people's hearts and the special relationship between the royal family and the nation. The Golden State coach waited outside Westminster Abbey, its ornate decorations gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. This magnificent vehicle, used only for the most important royal occasions, would carry the newly crowned King Charles III and Queen Camilla back to Buckingham Palace. Behind it, a fleet of other ceremonial carriages and cars stood ready to transport the extended royal family in a grand procession through the heart of London. Princess Kate gathered her children closer as they prepared for their own journey back to the palace. The excitement of the crowd was infectious, but she could see that Prince Louis was beginning to show signs of fatigue. The long ceremony and the overwhelming sensory experience of thousands of cheering people had been a lot for a 5-year-old to process. "Are you all right, my darling?" Kate asked Louis quietly, kneeling down to his level despite the formality of her dress and the watching cameras. Her maternal instincts always took precedence over royal protocol when it came to her children's well-being. Louis nodded, but leaned against his mother's shoulder, seeking comfort in her familiar presence. The noise and spectacle had been exciting, but now he was ready for something quieter and more familiar. Prince William coordinated with their security team to ensure the family's carriage was positioned correctly in the procession. The route back to Buckingham Palace had been carefully planned to maximize the public's opportunity to see the royal family while maintaining appropriate security measures. Prince George stood tall beside his father, clearly energized by the day's events rather than exhausted by them. At 9 years old, he was beginning to understand the historical significance of what he had witnessed and his own role in the continuing story of the British monarchy. The young prince watched with interest as the various carriages and vehicles were organized into their proper order. Princess Charlotte had found her second wind, bouncing excitedly as she spotted the beautiful horses that would pull their carriage. The magnificent animals, specially trained for royal ceremonies, stood perfectly still despite the noise and commotion around them. Their bridles and harnesses were polished to perfection, and their coats gleamed with careful grooming. "Look at the horses, Mama," Charlotte exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. "They're so beautiful and well-behaved." Kate smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. Charlotte had always loved animals, and the sight of the ceremonial horses had clearly captured her imagination. "They've been trained for years to take part in special occasions like this," Kate explained. "They're very important members of the royal household." The crowds lining the streets had grown even larger during the ceremony, as people who couldn't secure spots near the abbey had gathered along the processional route. Police barriers held back the enthusiastic spectators, but their energy and excitement were palpable. Union Jack flags fluttered everywhere, creating a sea of red, white, and blue that stretched as far as the eye could see. William helped his family into their designated carriage, ensuring that each child was seated safely and comfortably. The interior of the carriage was luxuriously appointed with deep blue velvet seats and gleaming brass fittings, but it was also designed to provide clear views for the occupants and the public alike. As the procession began to move, the sound from the crowds intensified dramatically. Thousands of people cheered and called out greetings to the royal family as they passed. Many had been waiting for hours in the hope of this moment, and their enthusiasm was infectious even inside the relative quiet of the carriage. George waved steadily to the crowds, his technique improving with each block they traveled. Kate had taught him to make eye contact with different sections of the crowd and to vary his waves so that as many people as possible felt personally acknowledged. For a 9-year-old, he was remarkably composed and thoughtful in his interactions with the public. Charlotte's natural exuberance made her a crowd favorite. Her genuine smiles and enthusiastic waves drew cheers and laughter from the spectators. She pressed her face to the carriage window, marveling at the decorations that adorned the buildings along their route. Bunting, flags, and banners celebrating the new king hung from every available surface. "There are so many people," Charlotte observed with wonder. "I can't see where they end." Indeed, the crowd seemed to stretch infinitely in both directions, a testament to the enduring fascination with royal ceremonies and the special place the monarchy held in British culture. People of all ages had gathered to be part of this historic day. From elderly citizens who remembered previous coronations to young families introducing their children to royal traditions. Louis had perked up during the carriage ride, the gentle swaying motion and the excitement of the crowds helping to revive his spirits. He waved shyly at the children he spotted in the crowd, particularly delighting when other young people waved back at him with obvious excitement. Kate maintained her gracious public demeanor throughout the journey, but William could see the genuine emotion in her eyes as she took in the scale of the public celebration. The British people's enthusiasm for the monarchy and their obvious affection for the royal family was deeply moving, especially on such a historically significant day. The procession moved at a stately pace, allowing the crowds plenty of time to see and photograph the royal family. Street vendors sold commemorative items, and many people held up their mobile phones to capture their own personal memories of the day. The atmosphere was festive and joyful, more like a national celebration than a solemn royal ceremony. As they approached the mall, the grand boulevard leading directly to Buckingham Palace, the crowds reached their peak density. The wide avenue was packed with spectators from curb to curb, all straining to get the best possible view of the royal procession. The red asphalt surface of the mall was barely visible beneath the mass of celebrating humanity. "Look ahead," William pointed out to the children. "You can see Buckingham Palace." The palace was indeed visible in the distance, its familiar facade decorated with celebratory banners and surrounded by even more crowds. The famous balcony where the royal family would make their traditional appearance was clearly visible, and Kate felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of the final public moment that awaited them. The Victoria Memorial, the large monument in front of the palace, was surrounded by thousands of additional spectators who had gathered, hoping to secure the best positions for the eventual balcony appearance. The entire scene was one of controlled chaos, with police and security personnel working seamlessly to manage the enormous crowds while maintaining the celebratory atmosphere. As their carriage turned into the palace gates, the family got their first glimpse of the courtyard where King Charles III and Queen Camilla had already arrived. The newly crowned monarch was visible through the palace windows, still wearing his ceremonial robes as he prepared for the final public appearance of the day. The children's excitement built as they realized they would soon be appearing on the famous balcony that they had seen in countless photographs and newsreels. For George, it would be one of his most significant public appearances to date. For Charlotte and Louis, it would be a magical culmination to an already extraordinary day. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The grand corridors buzzed with activity as staff members made final preparations for the traditional balcony appearance that would mark the culmination of Coronation Day. Princess Kate could hear the roar of the crowd outside even through the palace's thick walls, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building. Prince William gathered his family in one of the palace's ornate reception rooms, taking a moment to check on each child before their final public appearance of the day. The emotional weight of witnessing his father's coronation was still settling in his mind, but now his focus turned to ensuring his children were ready for what would be one of the most photographed moments of their young lives. "This is the part you've all been waiting for," William told his children with a warm smile. "In just a few minutes, we're going to step out onto the balcony and wave to all those people who came to celebrate with us today." Prince George straightened his shoulders, clearly understanding the significance of the moment. Throughout the day, he had shown remarkable composure for a 9-year-old, and now he seemed to draw on some inner reserve of strength as he prepared for this final public duty. Princess Charlotte practically bounced with excitement, her earlier fatigue completely forgotten in the anticipation of appearing on the famous balcony. "Will we be able to see everyone from up there?" she asked eagerly. "Will they all be looking at us?" "Yes, darling," Kate replied, smoothing down Charlotte's dress one final time. "There will be thousands and thousands of people, all celebrating Grandpa becoming king. They'll be very happy to see us." Prince Louis, who had rallied during the carriage ride, now seemed slightly overwhelmed again by the noise coming from outside. Kate knelt down beside him, her voice gentle and reassuring. "It's going to be wonderful, Louis. Just hold Mama's hand and wave to the people. They've all come here because they're excited about our family." The doors to the balcony room opened and King Charles III entered, still wearing his ceremonial robes but with the heavy St. Edward's crown now, replaced by the lighter imperial state crown. His face glowed with joy and satisfaction as he saw his son's family gathered together. Queen Camilla followed behind him, her own crown sparkling in the afternoon light streaming through the palace windows. "Are we ready for our moment?" the king asked, his voice warm with affection as he looked at his grandchildren. The weight of the crown he now wore seemed to sit easily on his shoulders, as if he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. William felt a surge of emotion as he looked at his father, now officially King Charles III. The man who had waited longer than any heir in British history to inherit the throne had finally achieved his destiny, and the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. The family moved toward the famous center room, with its French windows that opened directly onto the palace's most famous balcony. Kate could feel her heart beating faster as they approached the moment that would be broadcast around the world and remembered in history books for decades to come. Through the windows, The view was breathtaking. The mall stretched out before them like a red river flowing between banks of humanity. An estimated 100,000 people had gathered to witness this historic balcony appearance, their faces turned upward in anticipation, their voices creating a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very air. "My goodness," Kate whispered, genuinely awed by the scale of the crowd. Despite her years of experience with public appearances, "I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this." King Charles III stepped forward first, pushing open the French windows and stepping onto the balcony. The roar that greeted his appearance was deafening, a sound of pure celebration and joy that seemed to come from every corner of London. He raised his hand in acknowledgement, and the cheering intensified even further. Queen Camilla joined him, and together they waved to the enormous crowd. The sight of the newly crowned king and queen on the balcony was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the perfect conclusion to a day of pageantry and ceremony. William took Kate's hand and squeezed it gently. "Ready?" he asked, and she nodded, her professional composure masking the genuine emotion she felt at being part of such a historic moment. The couple stepped onto the balcony with their children, and if possible, the crowd's enthusiasm reached an even higher level. The sight of 3 generations of the royal family together on the balcony represented continuity, stability, and the enduring nature of the British monarchy. Prince George waved with practiced grace, his young face serious but pleased as he looked out over the sea of people. He understood, perhaps better than his siblings, that this moment would be remembered and that he was playing an important role in royal history. Princess Charlotte's natural exuberance made her an immediate crowd favorite. Her enthusiastic waves and bright smile drew cheers and laughter from the spectators below. She pressed against the balcony railing, marveling at the sight of so many people all looking up at them with joy and excitement. Prince Louis initially clung to his mother's hand, slightly overwhelmed by the noise and spectacle, but as he saw the smiling faces in the crowd and heard the happy cheering, his natural confidence began to emerge. Soon he was waving alongside his siblings, his shy smile growing more confident with each passing moment. Kate felt tears prick at her eyes as she took in the scene before them. The British people's enthusiasm and affection for the royal family was deeply moving, especially on such a significant day. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this balcony, from a middle-class family in Berkshire to becoming the Princess of Wales, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The traditional RAF flyover began to appear in the distance, adding another layer of spectacle to the already magnificent scene. The Red Arrows, with their distinctive red, white, and blue smoke trails, approached the palace in perfect formation, their display timed to coincide with the balcony appearance. As the aircraft passed overhead, trailing their colorful smoke across the London sky, the crowd's cheering reached a crescendo. The sight was both beautiful and deeply symbolic, representing the pride and strength of the nation celebrating its new monarch. King Charles III looked down the line at his family, his eyes bright with emotion as he took in this perfect moment. His son and daughter-in-law, who would one day stand where he stood now, waved graciously to the crowd. His grandchildren, who represented the future of the monarchy, charmed everyone with their natural personalities and obvious happiness. The balcony appearance lasted for several more minutes, allowing the photographers to capture the images that would define this historic day. The royal family stood together, united in their duty and their affection for each other. While below them, the British people celebrated not just a new king, but the continuing story of their ancient monarchy. As they finally stepped back inside the palace, Kate felt a profound sense of completion. The day had been perfect in every way, from their elegant arrival at Westminster Abbey to this final triumphant moment on the balcony. They had represented their country and their family with dignity and grace, creating memories that would last for generations. The coronation of King Charles III was now complete, and with it, a new chapter in the long story of the British royal family had begun.